Hello and welcome everyone to Tavant's exclusive webinar on disruption in retail, impact of changing consumer behavior. I am Vigneshwar, your host. During the course of the webinar, we shall share the comprehensive research we've done on retail industry and consumer behavior. You can post your questions anytime during the session using the Q&A and chat feature. Today, we have with us Samya Ghosh, Head of Retail and Digital at Tavant, with over 17 years of rich digital technology expertise and the driving force of our innovation in digital retail implementations. Co-presenting with him is Pratinesh Tekar, Marketing Leader for Digital and Retail at Tavant. He has over 11 years of experience in driving global digital strategy across functions. The data for this report is the outcome of Pratin's crucial field research. Without any further ado, let's dive into the webinar. Samya, over to you.
Thank you, Biggie. Hello and welcome again. Thanks for joining me this morning and my colleague Pratin. My name is Samya Ghosh, like Biggie said, and I'm the Vice President of Retail and Digital Practices at Tavant. Before we start on the research report itself, let me just give you a little bit of an obligatory overview of Tavant itself. As an organization, we are about 2 decades old. Our founders came from retail, building a price comparison platform called Changli that was later sold and integrated to Amazon. Since then, we've worked with a fairly diverse set of retailers, from mass merchants to specialized electronic retailers. Since then, like I was saying, we have worked with diverse retailers from mass merchants to specialized electronic retailers, from large box chains to really small startups, and from pure play internet companies to true omnichannel organizations. We are very entrenched in the space. We continue to do a lot of work in the space, and we have a vested interest in learning more about the space. And that was the driving cause for the research report that we did. Now, that was the cause, but what were our goals when we started out with the study? There are retail studies, a dime a dozen. You're reading obviously daily about news of how Amazon is killing off some of the more known traditional big retail names that we've grown up with. That most of these studies, though, they focus on what is happening, not the why. And what we are trying to get to is the why. Why is there change? Why is Amazon succeeding while many others are failing? Why are certain classes of retailers executing better while others aren't? And to understand the why, we thought that the best way to approach the problem was to really go to the root cause of how consumer behavior was changing. Why were consumers going towards particular brands rather than others? The second sort of driving force for us to do the study was to remove some of our own biases. We are all consumers in our own rights, and we often use our behavior as empirical evidence to inform the way we approach solutioning when we were working with clients. And we wanted to remove that bias, get a majority view by looking at a cross-segment of customers and using that to inform the way we approach solution building for our customers. And the third major driving factor was to do a little bit of crystal gazing. So what does the future hold for retail? Things are changing daily, but as we go forward, are there things that we can predict in terms of where consumer behavior is going and what kind of an impact it will have on the broader retail industry itself? So those were sort of our driving factors towards doing this retail. This was the first year that we did it, and we hope to be able to repeat this as an annual exercise so that we have a longitudinal study to compare and contrast over a period of time. Now, coming to the study itself, it was run over a period of time, and it did throw up some very interesting observations. The first thing, which is a little bit contradictory to all the news that you might be reading about Toys R Us right now, is that physical retail is far from dead. Notwithstanding the sort of daily dose of news that we get about the demise of the traditional retailer, it still constitutes an overwhelmingly large segment of how consumers buy today, and where they are buying from. The second, I think, interesting observation that we saw was that the basics of consumer loyalty, how to drive that, how to build that, remain unchanged. There are a variety of factors that come into play, and all of those factors need to be addressed, whether it's price, it's convenience, it's variety in terms of the product availability, it's transparency in terms of how the interaction is run, in terms of the content that is provided to the customer. It's how well service is executed once, not just once, but during a customer's purchase cycle. All of those are important factors driving, long-term loyalty. And then the third important thing is that, people remain far more heterogeneous than we would give them credit for. So the cohorts and profiles that segments that we came up with, were very, very wide. So let's jump into, the three main takeaways for us from the study. As children, we'd all been told that there are no shortcuts to success. Well, the summary actually reinforces that sentiment. There are no shortcuts to today surviving or actually thriving in the retail environment. There are three basic areas where execution remains and execution excellence in these three basic areas are actually, in our mind, the key to driving success. And I think the report justifies some of this, as we'll see as we go into the details a little later. The first one is obviously personalization. Now, this is spoken about and written about so much that it's a little embarrassing to mention this as part of any study output. It seems like an also-ran observation at this point. But I think one of the key takeaways for us is that personalization, as most retailers look at it today, is often driven by a thought of putting a recommendation engine in, and maybe doing the more traditional segmentation that has been done along demographic or let's say buying power, a few factors like that. And what the study really threw up is that personalization really requires intimacy about not just who the customer is, but what their motivations are. So personalization has to be driven by a much broader basket of data that includes demographic, behavioral, and psychographic data points about the customer. We think in order to execute personalization successfully, there needs to be massive data mobilization within a retail enterprise. It requires the ability to build, the more modern data crunching techniques. This is where, I think some of the emerging areas around machine learning, for example, will shine a lot. And even though this is a little bit scary, again, from the news articles that you might be seeing around Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica stuff, but if the core purpose of this intimacy, I think, is to better serve the customer, that spirit will shine through and will lead to, better execution and better engagement, overall, growth for a particular retailer. So that was sort of the first finding that we had, that, personalization is one of the most important factors. We'll see why a little later, but let's talk about what else are the headline level findings for the study. The second, I think, important outcome that the study helped us achieve or get to was that omnichannel execution remains very, very important. I spoke a little bit earlier about the fact that physical is far from dead, but if you look at the way omnichannel and in the traditional retail segment, the thought around omnichannel execution has evolved. You go back half a decade. Most of the conversation at that time was around multi-channel commerce, and that sort of transitioned into omnichannel commerce. And really, where we want to draw a distinction, and I think that's what the study is showing, is that it's no longer just about commerce. It is about omnichannel life cycle management, the journey management for the customer across the life cycle, and not just till the point that a customer makes a purchase. Now, again, what makes omnichannel tick, or what are the successful factors for an omnichannel strategy? I think the first and the most important factor is that every channel, customers will choose which channel to interact with at any given point of time, And it's very important to make every channel a co-equal and first-class citizen for every possible interaction. Let me give you an example. If let's say you and your friends or you and your family are planning a trip together, and you're going to buy a part of your airline ticket with, let's say, a frequent flyer with your frequent flyer points, and the remaining portion of your tickets with either cash or credit, and let's say there are two different people who are pitching in to make that purchase, there still is no way to make that purchase under single reservation booking code online. You'd have to call, a reservation agent for a particular airline or a travel services provider. And really, if you're at the top of the loyalty chain for that particular airline provider, good luck. That's great. Otherwise, good luck to you. It's probably best to find a secluded spot and spare some time on a Sunday afternoon, because you're going to be frustrated and potentially cursing a lot. The next piece, I think, for omnichannel execution that's important is to provide the same level of expertise to all channels, same level of information to all channels. So today, what we'll see, as the study will show it, as we go through it, is that the information edge is predominantly being won by the digital channels, and the associate channels are actually losing out on that. We feel that any physical interactions are today losing out, not because those interactions are suboptimal or customers are choosing to not interact that way. It's because the level of information available for those physical channels is far less than the power of the internet that the customer has on their hands when they are interacting digitally. So the two key takeaways from our side is omnichannel is important for omnichannel to work. You need to be able to execute and make every channel a co-equal partner, and then provide the same information edge for every channel that digital today enjoys. The last, key takeaway for us is around service. No surprises here. Service is often in the retail world taken to be the set of activities or the set of processes that have to be executed after a purchase is completed. And we feel this is, to an extent, losing the point. Service is actually an interaction opportunity, an intervention opportunity that can occur anywhere along the life cycle. Again, let me illustrate. I bought my daughter a small drone, which she promptly, flew. This was last summer, which she promptly flew into a tree. It got stuck there throughout the year, and we only recovered it after the trees shed their leaves later during the year. Luckily, I had warranty, so we went to replace it, and it so turned out that that particular model had already been retired. Now, I was on a call with a call center agent from that particular retailer, and it so happened that that agent was a drone enthusiast himself. And he not only was able to inform me about an alternative product, he directed me towards a YouTube video that showed me why that product was great. And in general, won me over with the sort of enthusiasm and the amount of information that he had about that particular product category. So what this means is that service interactions are largely going to be driven by your interactions with your associates. And this is where I'll go back to my point of providing enough information for your service agents to help them overcome the digital edge. In the same scenario that I was talking about, if I had to do the research for a particular alternate for that particular drone, I would have had to spend time. I'm a novice, I don't know enough about that particular product category. I would have had to spend time and rely on mass inputs instead of the curated information that this agent was able to provide, which really set that interaction apart. So to repeat, the three main, factors that drive to better retail execution is personalization, it's execution across omnichannels, and being able to provide an excellent service experience. Now, before I jump into why we think these factors are the most prominent and jump into the details of the study itself, let me hand over to my colleague Pratin, and Pratin will walk you over how, what was our methodology to conduct the study. Pratin, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Shamo, and welcome everyone again. So we ran the survey over a month across the US, across a panel of consumers representing cross sections of customers. And the results were actually collated based on the total sample set and based on the gender, demographics, and locations. So now during this, we try to understand what drives the customers to make a buying decision, or what are the different channels they take when they are moving from one stage of buying to another stage during the buying journey, right? Um, Also, when we just went deeper to find the preferred channels used by them, and also what are the factors that bring them back to the same retailer, right, or make them loyal. Now those were really crucial inputs that we got and helped us to come to a level where we could actually share all those insights with you. So um, Shamo is gonna talk about all that in detail, all the findings that we have further. Uh, but then we'll go through a quick poll now. We'll run it for a minute.
So it'll be great if everybody can jump in and respond to that poll, and then we'll get back to into the deeper dive around the study itself. Really, the simple question around the poll is, as retail, as part of retail organizations or providers of retail solutions, what are the three most important initiatives for you? Do you see a resonance around those three initiatives around personalization, omnichannel, and service excellence? Pratin, thank you. If you could move to the next slide, let's continue with the remainder of the presentation and walk you through how what were some of the key findings that led to our conclusions around the three service areas, the three areas of excellence for retailers. Pratin, can you move to the next slide? Okay, so one of the first questions that we had to ask ourselves is, what makes customers buy? Now, we know from past studies that have sort of been done on a cross-sectional basis that there are multiple motivations, multiple key factors that come into play, and customers weigh these these different factors differently in order to actually make a purchase or an engagement decision. Common factors are price, convenience, availability, reliability, variety, quality, the level of personalization provided, service, all of those pieces. So we had a bouquet of these factors that we presented to the customer. And instead of asking customers to just rate one factor to say this is the most important, we asked them to rate, the top set of factors, to organize those factors in a ranking in terms of what was important to them. Our prejudgment was that we'll see the responses coalescing around maybe 2 to 3 factors that appear in the top the top segment most commonly. Now, price comes close. It was probably the most commonly cited factor across the board. But there were across all the different factors that we presented to the customers around 300 plus variations possible. And when we looked at the responses, what we saw is that if we looked at it as a bouquet of factors, not a single individual factor, then there was no single combination that cracked even the 20% mark. Far less come closer to the halfway mark in terms of saying these factors are the most important. So in this case, the research sort of surprised us. What we do understand from this is and our key takeaway from this was the fact that understanding customer motivations is very, very important, because different customers, different segments of customers weigh all these different factors very, very differently. So this is where personalization as a factor becomes really, really important. It's not just about who the customer is, which demographic they belong to, which location they are from, what kind of buying purchase power they have, but it's also what's driving them to make a particular purchase or to conduct a particular interaction. And to get that sort of behavioral inputs, we really have to look at the breadcrumbs of that the customers leave behind in every interaction, whether these are digital interaction or offline interactions. Not just that, we have to not just look at data that will be available within a particular set of interactions that are conducted by a retailer. It has to be extended beyond those boundaries to really understand the motivations of how customers conduct their day-to-day life more broadly. So data from second parties and third parties start becoming extremely important. And this is where we feel that the traditional data crunching, building a data warehouse, doing some historical segmentation really falls short. We believe that modern analysis techniques like machine learning is the way to go for this type of analytics that personalization infrastructures today require, where you can not just look at historically what the performance has been, but what the performance is likely to be going forward, as well as be able to deliver some of those insights real time to all the different channels that are part of the customer's life cycle interaction. Okay, so that was one of the key takeaways that we got based on these series of questions that we asked around why customers buy, what drives their buying behavior. Let's move to the next slide, and we'll talk about how we came to the fact that omnichannel came out as one of the most important other areas of execution. So the next set of category of questions that we asked customers was more around not why they buy, but how they go about making their purchasing decisions. Where do they actually find their information? Where do they do their comparison? Who are they speaking to? And then finally, where are they buying? Where are they getting help after purchase if they need help with the particular product that they've bought? Again, the question was presented as a set of a combination of channels at particular life cycle stages for the customer. And our thought was that digital would be a strong factor here. This time, the study was not as surprising. Our hunch was partially correct. While there were about 200 different possible paths that customers could take, digital did win a significant number of those paths. So if you just look at the graph that is on the screen right now, and this graph, by the way, doesn't even present the whole life cycle. It just focuses on the awareness, attraction, and acquisition life cycle stages. You can already see the variations in paths, but you can also see that a lot of those paths actually start with one or other digital channel. However, if you do the same analysis over the broader life cycle, we start seeing why physical channels are still so important. Because a lot of the behavior, not just in terms of making up their mind, but in terms of purchasing and consuming, getting inputs, getting service around the product that they've purchased, actually coalesces around more of the physical channels much more strongly. So that led us to one of the key outcomes that the study presents, which is that omnichannel behavior is an extremely important focus for retail excellence in terms of execution. The one other minor takeaway from this particular point of the study, or these questions in the study, is that you can see a growing importance within digital of the mobile channel, And we expect to see that continue and become more and more prominent as mobile becomes the primary takeoff point for digital interactions for customers across across the broad spectrum. Now, we had already had a sense that digital was going to be one of the most important channels here. So in and around this area of focus, we also had questions, which is where the next set of findings are from. Pratin, if you move to that next slide, around what customers bought digitally. Was there a preponderance or a preference for a particular set of products that customers particularly bought on digital? And then did they rely on the more traditional store or any other channels for buying other categories of products? Pratin, could you move to that slide? Yeah, the next one, please. And here, one of the key things that outcomes that comes out is that people are buying everything digitally. So there is no one specific category of product that sort of won out in terms of a preference buying things digitally versus not buying them digitally. Hey, by the way, are there any questions, Biggie?
Hey, Shamir, there's one question from one of our attendees. And the question is, given what we see in the news, Toys R Us shutting down their stores in the US, is digital cannibalizing and killing store channels altogether? We will see stores dying, and if not, how will they evolve? That's the question from one of our participants.
Great question. So no, as I think we've emphasized for the study, I know that Toys R Us is probably an outlier in this particular section, but we do see other major brands like Nordstrom's, Macy's, for example, starting to get a feel around how they execute digitally. We don't think that physical channels are dead. I think physical channels will morph where they become not just one of the key channels for showrooming of products. So more experience centers where customers come to really get a feel of the product, try them out before they make the purchase. But also, if you read a follow-up story to Toys R Us, you might have seen that Amazon is planning to buy some of those stores out, the evacuate at this point, the abandoned properties, and use them as mini distribution centers. So we do feel that the stores are going to evolve. They're not going to die out. They may not remain as a big shopping location, but they are going to be an experience location, and they are going to be very, very important fulfillment locations going forward. But great question. Thanks for that. Let me come back to what we were talking about in terms of the different categories of products that are being purchased digitally. Like I was saying, everything is being purchased digitally. There's sort of no preference there across the different categories of products that we presented to the customer. This is apparel or content, electronics, obviously, grocery, financial products, houseware, pharmaceuticals. Across all these categories, people are interacting and buying digitally. Unsurprisingly, the most varied purchase across these categories happens within the millennial segment. So if you look at the segments, either male men or women between 18 to 24 and 25 to 34, you'll see that the variation, the distribution of these categories is the widest. Which means that if there are retailers that are considering only exposing a part of their catalog because they feel that that portion sells better digitally, in the long term, we think that's a losing strategy. The second piece that I think a key takeaway from this portion of the study was that there are clear generational preferences. So unsurprisingly, if you look at the women 65 or older category, you'll see that what wins out there is pharma and household goods. Household goods obviously being hard to move, hard to carry from a physical store into the car. if it's delivered at the doorstep, great. That's very, very convenient. And again, unsurprisingly for men 65 or older, takeout tended to be a very big area of purchase. For men 65 and older, while we are on that particular category, electronics didn't figure at all. So if you're an electronics retailer and you see an elder gentleman walking into the store, that's your golden target. That's who you should be going after. The one area, though, the only area that was somewhat surprising, it had very low, ultimately purchase in terms of digital, was the financial products category. It's sort of the only outlier to the overall segments, that categories of products that were presented to the consumers. And we don't know why. We did not have follow-up questions around why. But this could be because of the sensitivity towards sharing data digitally, or it could be because of regulatory restrictions. But obviously, it means that if there are consumer banking or consumer insurance companies, then they need to focus on their omnichannel strategies even more than any other categories of retailers. So that was sort of a key segue from why people buy, which channels do they buy, and what they buy. The last big area of our study was around what drives long-term stickiness, what drives loyalty. And in this particular case, we did not present a coded set of questions to the customer. What we gave them was a set of questions that allowed them to answer in open-ended natural text. And we did that text processing to come out with the tag cloud, which sort of shows the most important features that are part of driving long-term loyalty. Now, again, what you'll see here is price figures prominently. But what we also noticed is that since this was provided in natural languages, customers actually provided both good and bad feedback around what drove loyalty. So they would make comments that said that this helped me buy from this retailer again. They would also say that this was one of the main drivers for me not to go back to this particular retailer. So when we correlated the negative and positive sentiments against specific factors that drove loyalty, this is where service actually wins out over price as well. Again, probably not surprising that if a customer has made a purchase from a particular provider and then had a bad service experience anywhere along the journey, they are unlikely to go back to that particular retailer. So that sort of drove our third key finding, which was that service matters, and providing excellence around service is very important. Service is also overwhelmingly, again from the natural text we found out, is judged by the quality of interactions that customers had with associates, not necessarily with digital channels. And that's why we feel that providing information and content and tools and capabilities is the most important part of how service excellence can be achieved. So let's conclude. There were other questions that we had which provided great tidbits of information and insight, but it's too long a list to cover. So let's go through and conclude around the study itself. From our perspective, the key takeaways are that the basics matter, and the basics revolve around personalization. The basics revolve around omnichannel execution, and the basics revolve around service quality. I'll be switching track, in a while to talk about what we as Tavant are doing for a different cross segment of our customers. Along these three lines, along the lines of personalization or omnichannel execution or service management. But in the meanwhile, let me pause again for a while to see if there are any other questions.
So we have one question from one of our attendees. The question is, are retailers ready for ML or AI? And do they have the data infrastructures to execute AI or ML?
Again, a great question. Thanks for that. Um, we believe that this is a prerogative that cannot be ignored. So the question is valid that a lot of retailers today are struggling to put together even the data that is generated from within their enterprise to build a common single view around different domains of that particular data, whether it be data around customers or price or product or shipments. But this is not a question of you know will the retailers be able to execute on AI? The question is, will they survive if they don't execute around AI and ML? And I think that's a prerogative that all retailers, whether it's in small incremental steps, maybe just putting together, data infrastructure around maybe just customer segmentation, or experimenting with integration with a particular second or third party from where they can purchase data. Whether it be areas like that, it's overall, I think, a strategy that all retailers have to take into account today, and start that journey. That journey is going to be, at least a 3-year sort of journey to get to maybe the level that they want to get to, but it's one that cannot be ignored at all. Hopefully that answered your question. Any other questions? Otherwise, we will move on and maybe talk a little bit about what we are doing as part of our organization with different customers.
No other questions at this point, Sharma. You can continue.
Okay. Thank you, Biggie. Pratin, if you can move on to some of our key case studies here. So the first case study that, as Pratin moves ahead, that we'll be talking about is one that we did for a large mass merchant retailer, that operates across multiple geographies, operates across large store facilities, as well as has a growing digital presence. Now, what the customer was looking to do was, this goes back to the leveraging of infrastructure for better personalization, better localization of their pricing engine. This particular retailer carried, thousands, actually not even thousands, it's tens of thousands of SKUs, across their product catalog. And one of the biggest challenges that they had was being able to set or adjust prices based on time and based on geography for their digital channel, and still keep it competitive to what other mass merchant retailers in that particular area was doing. So Tavant actually helped put together the data infrastructure that did data collection from not just within the enterprise, like shipment data around around a particular location for their store channels. Using that to correlate what locationally might be available for the digital channel, but also gather data through things like screen scraping, through buying that data from panel providers like Nielsen, and using that to build, first of all, a historical look back model at how prices moved during different times and at different locations, but also build a predictive model that could dynamically adjust prices for their online channels. It dealt with a massive data set of about 100 terabytes of data, and it was deemed a great success when the execution was completed. So that's a case study of how personalization comes into play. This is obviously very coarse-grained personalization that is just focused on location and product only, but it's still a great example, especially at that scale of the journey that customers are undertaking. Let's move on to the next one, Pratin. Okay. The next case study that we wanted to talk about was around how omnichannel journeys are created. And this was for a client who's an online game developer. they sell games through CDs, which are obviously played on consoles. But they also have a lot of large online gaming titles on their catalog. And one of the key things that this game environment provides is for the ability to drive interactions for either asking questions or buying credits, or buying additional features in and around those specific massive online gaming infrastructures. The way we helped the client was by actually understanding or doing the research to figure out what was the customer's journey, at what points during specific gameplays, game scripts do customers really try and execute a particular type of interaction, like ask for help or ask for a purchase, and then optimize it into that, integrate the sort of transactional systems like buying something or asking for help into the gaming infrastructure that the customer built. Again, you're talking about 100 million players, across sort of multiple segments being supported, dynamically figuring out that a particular player was at a point where they would need to branch out from their journey, walk away from the game, traditionally. But with the changed behavior, with the changed solution that we provided, they could stay in that game and still get to the transaction that they needed to execute. Example of we talk about this as an example of the omni-channel journey because this integrated not just the pure digital gameplay scenarios, but also integrated things like calling into the customer service or being able to place orders through consoles like the Xboxes of the world. So again, a fantastic case study from our perspective of what drives omnichannel behavior and how omnichannel behavior can be molded by building a better understanding of the customer journeys. Let's move on to sort of the next case study here. This was for a retailer out of our Asia Pacific, client market. And this was a retailer that was looking to develop a personalized experience for customers, so that customers, things like a recommendation engine that we take for granted on Amazon, they were trying to build that particular engine. And since this retailer operated as a marketplace, allowed the merchants to actually be able to drive, some of those recommendations. So the idea was that I, as a consumer, if I was on that marketplace and my behavior indicated the need for a recommendation for certain categories of products, then being able to get that recommendation from a particular merchant that operated within that marketplace. One of the world's largest, and fastest growing e-commerce markets, huge diversity in terms of the clients and concurrent customers that were there, and the need for the real-time infrastructure to be able to react, as a customer was interacting with the digital experience itself. And then last case study that I'll talk about is again from a pure omnichannel perspective. So Pratin, if you don't mind moving to that. This was actually not for a retailer as a solution provider, a product and platform provider for the retailers. They provide a lot of the point of sale solutions, for different categories of retailers, everything from, the mass merchants to electronic stores to even gas stations, grocery chains, and so on. And the traditional point of sale has always been just a dumb terminal that can capture, your credit card information or can execute, a financial transaction. But the idea for this particular client was to enhance that point of sale experience by bringing in things like loyalty, and that loyalty would largely be driven through self-service digital channels. But the information had to be flown into the point of sale to be able to enhance the loyalty service experience, be able to make to provide couponing and promotion at the appropriate time based on the particular basket of products that the customer was buying. So this was again a clear, clear sort of tie-in between how the more traditional channels, the physical channels with their old legacy infrastructures are being transformed, not just by what our customers, our retail customers are doing, but also that same thought process permeates across the other service providers, other platform and product providers that are operating in the retail space. So we just wanted to give you a quick overview, not to spend a lot of time on what we do as a part of Tavant, but hopefully that gave you, some key insights about what's happening in the retail space, and also gave you a view of how we as an organization are helping our retail customers. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today afternoon. And if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Biggie, otherwise it's back to you.
All right. Thank you, Samya and Pratin, for those vivid insights. We do not have any further questions as of today. And thank you to all our attendees today for the overwhelming participation. We'll be sharing the download link to the research report shortly through an email. You can always reach us for any queries on the webinar or any other details around digital transformation at Tavant. The email is bizdev, that's bizdev @tavant.com. Good day, and thank you, everyone.